Hello everyone, and welcome to game number 6 of the 1971 semifinal match between Bent Larsen and Bobby Fischer. Now, I hope you're having an excellent Saturday, and hopefully this game will further improve your Saturday. That being said, Bent Larsen is now in kind of in the position Mark Taimanov found himself in. The score is now 5-0 in Fischer's favor, and if he wants to at least draw this match or to allow for playoffs, he has to. Now Larsen would have to win five of the next games in a row, which is highly unlikely because, as we already mentioned this, during the 1970 interzonal tournament in Palma de Mallorca, Bobby Fischer won 7 of his last games in a row there. Then he continued by defeating Mark Taimanov 6-0, and now he already beat Bent Larsen 5-0. So it is very unlikely that Fischer will now lose 5 games in a row. But you know, it could happen. And we do have, also I will be using some of the comments by Mikhail Tal from his Shach 64 magazine. Also, there will be a link to that in the description below if you want to check it out. I found a nice article from on chess.com about it. Someone delivered all the news from the newspapers there. So that being said, let's check out this game. So so far Larsen tried a lot of ideas. Now for the final, well, for the 6th game, he opens with f4. He chooses the bird's opening, and here Tal says that now it's pretty much clear that even Larsen came to terms with who is the winner of this match. So perhaps he just wants to have fun. c5 was played, knight to f3, Fischer goes g6, e4, bishop to g7, and the bishop to e2. Seems like a passive move with the bishop, but Tal says that it's actually the correct idea. If you try something like bishop to c4, which seems like a much more active move, after e6, d5 will simply come with a tempo, as it comes with an attack on the bishop, and it will only help black. So, a nice move, bishop to e2. Knight to c6, we have castles, d6, d3, e6, and the knight to a3. Tal says that this is a move very much characteristic, you know, with Larsen's style. He wants to use well-known opening lines and theory, but also add some of his own original style. Knight to g to e7 by Fischer, c3. We have castles, bishop to e3, and now a6. As you can see, Fischer has a rook on a8. Perhaps the other rook will also join. The queen side, this bishop is slicing the board all the way here, and Fischer will definitely want to resume play on the queen side by pushing the pawns. So d4 here by Larsen. C captures on d4, and now knight captures on d4. Also, if white tries something like c captures on d4 to get this massive center, then f5 will be a very nice idea by black, and black will be more than fine here. So after c captures, we have knight captures on d4, and now b5. Fischer simply continues with his plan of playing on the queen side. Knight captures on c6, knight captures, and now comes queen to d2. Tal mentions that also possible is, of course, queen to e1 and transferring the queen over to the king side and starting an attack against black's king, but, you know, what else would Tal suggest? So, queen to d2 by Larsen, and now queen to c7. And here, rook 8 to d1 by Larsen. Now, you could argue that, okay, perhaps queen to c7, now the queen is a bit misplaced. Maybe an idea like f5 is worth considering, and it's definitely worth considering, but black wouldn't be in any real danger here, because after, for example, captures, and bishop captures, let's say you even sacrifice an exchange here, g captures, it's not all that, you know, trivial how to continue this attack. Rook to f1, for example, maybe you want to get the rook in there, but then knight e5 comes, you prevent the rook lift, and black would most likely be okay here. But I'm sure there are plenty of people who would actually go for this, such as Tal. So queen to c7, we have rook 8 to d1 by Larsen, and now comes rook to d8. We have knight to c2 and rook to b8. Here Tal says that this is really a bold move by Fischer, completely ignoring what Larsen is trying to do here. As you can see, the bishop being on c8 prevents the rooks from being connected. So e5, definitely a move you have to take into consideration before playing a move like rook to b8. But Fischer doesn't care, he goes rook to b8, and now we have a3. Again, Larsen says that, Tal says that still a move like queen to e1, sorry, a move like queen to e1 with transferring the queen over to the king side would also be worth considering. You know, why not start an attack against black's king? But okay, rook to b8, we have a3 by Larsen, and now comes knight to a5. By playing this a3 move, Larsen weakens the b3 square, also knight to c4 will be an idea, and Fischer, of course, takes advantage of this immediately. e5, Fischer decided that this was, not a problem for black, so he allows it. Bishop to f8, of course you cannot capture because of queen captures on d8, so bishop to f8 defending, and now b4, kicking the knight back. Here, knight to c4 isn't all that great for black. After bishop captures and queen captures, you can simply go bishop to d4 to, solidify in the center, and then after knight comes to e3, kicks away the queen, white's position will be very nice here. So after b4, Fischer simply goes back, knight to c6, and here white is pretty much forced to capture on d6. But if you capture and bishop captures, then black's position is beautiful here, and Larsen will not be able to really do anything here. Well, I mean, he can of course always draw, but a draw at this point is worth nothing to him. But even though he could have afforded a draw in game 5, he decided not to go for a draw in game 5 either. So okay, after this knight to c6 by Fischer, knight to d4 now. As a draw is out of the question, Larsen decides to sacrifice a pawn and perhaps try and attack Fischer's king. We have pawn captures, and Fischer grabs the pawn. Knight captures on e5. Bishop to g5, attacking Fischer's rook on d8, and now rook to d5. An excellent defensive maneuver by Fischer, because bishop to e7 would actually allow white to really go for something more. After bishop captures, queen captures, you get this queen to f4 move. The knight is here attacked. You can't move the knight because the rooks aren't connected. The rook on b8 is undefended. So after rook to d5, c4, and black loses the exchange. For example, captures, and now your rook is under attack. If you move the rook, you lose the knight. So you have to capture here, and then queen captures on b8, and you would lose the exchange here. Still, it would be playable, but no reason to do this. So rook to d5. Fischer holds on to everything. Queen to f4, again pressuring the king side, and now we have bishop to g7. Queen captures on c3. Would really have been a bold move, but there's no reason to do it, because after bishop to f3, you again lose the exchange here. There's really nothing to do. Even if you go knight captures on f3 with check, you get rook captures on f3, and now it's even worse, because your queen is under attack, you're getting crushed here. Queen captures on f7 is coming, and you can't defend with queen c7, because the queen from f4 also guards the c7 square. So after queen to f4, bishop to g7 by Fischer, and now comes h4. We have rook to b7. Fischer now gets a really nice idea. He wants to introduce more defenders to the f7 square, but also this will allow his queen to actually capture the pawn on c3. So okay, we have bishop to f6, bishop captures, queen captures, and here a lot of people criticized Fischer for this move because he's already up in material, he's already up a pawn, and he should have gone for something like queen to e7. This is what everyone suggested, but he just went for queen captures on c3, grabbing another pawn, and now he allows Larsen to really start an attack. Larsen plays h5, and here it's really not all that clear what you should do. For example, if you try rook captures on d4, you get queen captures on e5. Rook to d3, you offer a trade of queens, but now queen to f4. Rook captures, and after bishop to d7, it's a pretty okay game for both white and black. White is very active here, no doubt that he could hold this to a draw. On the other hand, after this h5 move, not capturing on d4, but for example, queen to e3, which comes with protection of the knight here on e5, king h1, and now rook captures on d4. It's not all that great because of rook captures, and after queen captures, you get rook to d1. Now you can't move the queen because the rook is coming to d8, and whatever, you either have to capture the rook here and give up the queen. If you move the queen, then even h6 is coming, and now there's no defense against queen to g7 checkmate. So after this h5 move, Fischer actually plays g captures on h5. A very nice idea. We have king to h1, a nice prophylactic move, and now comes knight to g4, forcing white to capture the knight. We have bishop captures, pawn captures, and now queen to h6. if you try something like rook to c1 with an attack on the queen and the threat, if the queen moves, you will capture the bishop on c8, doesn't work because of rook to h5 check. King moves, and now queen to e3 check, which comes with a check. Now, if you block with the rook, you lose the rook on c1. And of course, if you block with the queen, then you can simply exchange queens, and it's all fine for black. Bishop to d7 is coming, and you are simply up 3 pawns, easily winning endgame. So okay, h captures on g4, Larsen goes queen to h6. Bishop to d7 by Fischer, and now comes rook to f4. Larsen still is playing for the win, because as Tal mentions, rook captures on f7 is pretty much a forced draw. After king captures, rook to f1, you have to block. If you move the king, then queen to f8 is coming, so you have to block, and now simply queen captures on h7. King e8, you can go queen h8 check, king f7, queen here, king e8, queen h8, king f7, queen to h7. You can never touch the e7 square, because then knight to f5 comes with check, and then white will actually win this game. But still, after this bishop to d7 move by Fischer, rook captures on f7 is a forced draw. But Larsen, a draw is pretty much the same as a defeat, because in regards of who wins the match, of course. So rook to f4 by Larsen, and now f5 by Fischer. Still here, after queen to g5 check, Larsen could have drawn this game. For example, king to f7. Now, if king to f7, then queen g4, and then black would actually be in trouble. So we'd have to go king h8, and then again it would result in a draw. But like we said, Larsen has to go for the win, so queen to f6. But now Fischer goes bishop to c8, a nice move with the bishop back, and now queen g5 will no longer achieve a draw for white, as Fischer can simply bring the rook over into the defense. So okay, rook back to f1, we have rook to f7, kicking back the queen, queen to h6, and now comes the bishop to b7. Simply putting this bishop on a beautiful diagonal, and now Fischer will start his own attack. Knight captures on e6, a very nice idea, but Fischer allowed this for a reason. Queen to f6, and the attack is repelled. Now, if you trade queens, of course, then rook captures on d5, bishop captures. Black is up 2 pawns, most likely an easily winning endgame for Fischer. So after queen to f6, queen back to e3 was played. Rook to e7, now piling up on the knight because it's pinned. Rook to e1, and now rook to d6. Now with a triple attack against Larsen's knight, so we have queen to g5 check. Here Larsen forces the trade of queens, but now it's far too late for such things. Queen captures, knight captures, rook captures, and bishop to d5. Here Larsen played rook to e8 check, and here we have king to g7, and it was in this position on move 40 that Bent Larsen resigned the game, and Fischer won yet another match in the candidate series with a result of 6-0. Now, before I forget, we do have this photo. It's a photo from the newspapers. There you can see it says underneath, Grandmaster Bobby Fischer of the United States studies the board before a move as he downed Bent Larsen of Denmark Tuesday night in the 6th and deciding game of a 10-game World Chess Championship semifinal challenge series. Fischer forced Larsen to resign after 40 moves in winning his 6th straight over the Danish champ. So there you have it. Also, I will put a link to this photo in the description if anyone wants to, learn more about it. And as I don't want to forget, these are the standings of the semifinals. So as you can see, in Denver, Fischer defeated Larsen 6-0, so that match lasted only 6 games. And as you can see, Petrosian and Korchnoi played the entirety of the match, so 10 games were played, and you can see the final result was 5.5 to 4.5, where 9 games were drawn and only 1 game was won by Tigran Petrosian. So definitely a close match between Petrosian and Korchnoi. And okay, you might argue that Petrosian had a tougher opponent, that Korchnoi, in 1971 was a tougher opponent than Larsen, but still 5.5 to 4.5 and 6-0. It's not all that likely that Petrosian will be able to prevent Fischer from pursuing his, dream of becoming world champion. But as this is our next stop in the series, we're definitely going to enjoy that. So yeah, first crushing the field in Palma de Mallorca 1917. Then we had a match with Mark Taimanov in Vancouver, Canada, that ended 6-0. Then we have here in Denver, Colorado, again Fischer, presents brilliant play with a result of 6-0 against Bent Larsen. And now, after all of this has been played, we have the final match against Tigran Petrosian. So Fischer is off to Buenos Aires to face the former world champion. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this game. It's very interesting. I will once again mention what Botvinnik mentioned about this entire event. So before facing Petrosian, Botvinnik says that it's very easy to see how Fischer won each one of his games. So if you analyze the games, you can see that Fischer is just a better player. And it's pretty much clear how he won every game. But it's very hard to imagine how he won all the games 12-0. Botvinnik does mention Lasker's, for example, a great result, against Marshall and Janowski, and those were really one of the most impressive results in chess history, match-wise. But still, it was not 100% against two of the strongest grandmasters in the world, like Fischer did here. So this was unprecedented, and everyone knew that. Botvinnik even mentions his encounter with Fischer in the Varna Olympiad, when Fischer wasn't even 20 years old yet. And Botvinnik says that while he played Fischer, he understood that this is some great chess force in front of him, even though he was such a young lad. But Botvinnik said that it was definitely not Botvinnik who was deciding the tone of the battle and how this was going to turn out. He said that Fischer was better at everything in that game, and because he was better in combinations, that he achieved a winning position. If you haven't seen that game, I will also put a link to that game in the description below, as it's the only game ever played between Bobby Fischer and Mikhail Botvinnik. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I do hope you enjoyed this match, and that you're still enjoying the Bobby Fischer series. Next stop, it's Buenos Aires, and it's the match finals of the 1971 candidates, Bobby Fischer versus Tigran Petrosian. So yeah, I would like to thank Bethany Love, Chris Durant, Farjat Yafarinia, Andriy Mukuha, and Dustin Yanatpour for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you soon, most likely starting the Fischer versus Petrosian match. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.